Hey, it's Dave Specter with Fret 12's Blues and Beyond. Another episode today at Evanston Space. We're here in the studios with Nick Moss. How you doing, Nick?
Hi, Dave.
All right, man. 20 years on the Chicago blues scene. Definitely, I don't know if we'd call you a rising star because you've been out here so long, but you're definitely one of the main guys that everyone's talking about on the scene. And I remember you from back, in like the late 80s, we used to hang out.
Yeah, 20 years.
Yeah.
I come and see you play 20 years ago.
Yeah. And I know one of your first big gigs was playing with Jimmy Rogers before you started your own band.
Right.
And I know you also played with guys like Jimmy Dawkins and backed up a ton of harp players as well. And let's see, you just released your 8th album, Privileged, which is getting a ton of press. And I noticed that it's not only getting press in the blues world, but it's also kind of crossing over a bit into the, I don't know if you'd call it the jam band scene or...
It got a lot of play on those college jam radio stations.
Yeah.
So
that's cool.
And I think Relics magazine picked up on it, so that helped a lot.
Yeah, so I know the record has, it kind of represents a different side of you. It's a little more rockin', not as much of a traditional blues record, which I find interesting that you kind of, went in a different direction. How did that come about?
It was just like, for me, it was you're probably the same as I am. I grew up listening to bands like Led Zeppelin and Jimi Hendrix. And my uncle, who was about 15 years younger than my dad, was kind of like my brothers and my older brother. He was, not more or less an older brother instead of an uncle, because he used to hang out and hip us to all this music. We'd be riding in his old Buick, man, listening to Traffic and Free and all this stuff, and he'd make, buy us records and stuff. So I grew up listening to all that stuff, and those are the guys, that turned my brother and myself on to the blues guys in our backyard,
Yeah.
If it wasn't for these guys, I wouldn't have even known who Muddy Waters or Jimmy Rogers or any of these guys were, because they were talking on them. You remember reading Circus magazine and all that stuff as a kid, and you reading Jimmy Page talking about Otis Rush and B.B. King and all these guys. So they turned me on to blues first, and it just so happens that I got into blues hard as a teenager. And I just thought, man, after 20-something years, man, I'd like to maybe kind of show what brought me to the blues.
That's cool. So did you, in terms of your guitar sound on the record, I know there's some cool overdrive sounds, and, how did you approach, just the guitar aspect of the record?
I wanted to try and get some of those classic British rock sounds, and so it started with an orange amp. I got one of those an orange dual Terror amps. I bought that and I used that, and a friend of mine let me use a Marshall Plexi that he had. And I didn't really use the Marshall too often because it's just my studio's small, and for the most part the whole album's that orange amp. And then on a couple tracks, just a little Silverface Deluxe.
Cool. And what kind of guitars were you playing?
Stratocasters. Man, I played like a 60s model Strat with a rosewood neck, and then my SG and a Les Paul pretty much for the whole record, and then a couple acoustic guitars for some tracks.
Right. And one of the covers you did on it was Cream,
Politician.
Right. What did you use on that?
That was a 61 SG. That's the SG special that I bought when I was about 18.
Okay.
Yeah,
it's a great tone on that.
I used that through that guitar and that orange amp, and then I think I was using one of those Octavia pedals too, a little bit on there.
So you have your own studio, and you have your own label as well. We should mention Bluebella Records, which has been around for 15 years now?
No, not quite. About 10 years now.
Okay.
Yeah.
And all of your records are on Bluebella, and you also record a lot of other cool bands like Kilbourne Alley and the Cashbox Kings. And you want to talk about the label?
Yeah, that like you said, that kind of started out just as a vehicle for me to put a record out, because I couldn't get anyone interested. So once I did that, after a couple, CDs out and
Yeah.
getting some interest and people starting to notice me, then I kind of started thinking about, friends of mine that were kind of in the same boat that,
Yeah.
weren't getting any interest from labels. And the
Mhm.
first guy was Bill Upkin.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been friends with Bill for years.
Bill's a great harp player who's based in, was it Fort Wayne?
Fort Wayne,
Yeah,
Indiana.
Fort Wayne, Indiana.
And he played with all the guys in the late 60s, early 70s, and
Yeah.
played with Jimmy Rogers for years and
Yeah.
stuff. So he was one of the first guys that, that we did a record with. And then the Kilbourne Alley, those young kids down from Champaign, Illinois. And it just kind of grew from there. And a former member of my band, Jerry Hunt, Jerry was a big fan of Johnny Young and Yank Rachel, and he wanted to do kind of like a Chicago blues mandolin CD.
Mm-hmm.
So we did that record.
Mm-hmm.
And then Cashbox Kings came next, and my friend of mine, Matt Stubbs, who plays guitar for Charlie Musselwhite
Mm-hmm.
out on the East Coast.
Yeah, he's a good player.
Yeah, and so that, right now that's it, and I think we got a couple surprises this year. I think we may be reissuing a Gary Primich CD this year.
Oh, cool. So, I mean, how do you balance out the life on the road and the gigs here in Chicago with running a label?
Well, the way it works for me is, for probably most musicians, the winter's downtime, slow time. So most of my recording is done anywhere from like November to February.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
my lovely wife, Kate, she's the brains of the operation.
Yeah.
She works harder than anyone.
Uh-huh.
I mean, she runs her own business with her graphic design business, takes care of my 6-year-old daughter, and pretty much runs the label for the rest of the year.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. So you're on the road quite a bit. I know after this gig that we're playing together tonight in Evanston, you're going directly to a festival in Massachusetts.
Yeah, we got to play in Worcester
Yeah.
tomorrow night, and then in Salisbury on Saturday, the festival.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And I know you also play in Europe quite a bit. Any fun Europe stories or cool festivals you've been doing lately?
Well, we did that No Tudden festival.
Oh yeah.
We brought Jimmy Johnson with,
Yeah.
and that was to me that was one of the funnest times I've had over there, man. Jimmy that guy's 82 years old, man, and he's had more energy than anyone on the band. we flew Chicago to Philadelphia, and then flew Philadelphia to Oslo, and then had to get on a 3-hour bus ride up the mountain into No Tudden. And there was 4 bands on the bus. Everyone's, ass dragging, and
Yeah.
Jimmy's cutting jokes the whole 3 hours, making everyone laugh.
Yeah.
I ain't the problem, I'm the solution. And he starts out every story, like, look, I don't want to hurt no one. I ain't out for no trouble. And then every story ends with how he pulled a knife or a gun or he judo chopped someone.
Yeah.
So that was fun. That was a good time.
Yeah, man. It's a good role model to look up
Yes.
to, man. I want to ask you, Nick, about your time with Jimmy Rogers.
Mm-hmm.
How much time did you spend in his band as his guitar player?
A little over 3 years, almost 4.
Uh-huh. And how'd you get the gig with Jimmy?
It was a funny story because I was playing a gig with Joe Charles and Liz Manville at Lachette's Musical Inn. I remember that night. And Dave Clark was on the gig.
Yeah.
And Dave was telling me at the end of the night, he's like, oh, I'm so bummed out, man. Jimmy Rogers called me to go on a tour, but, I have my kid this summer,
Yeah.
and I can't do it. And I was actually playing bass that night, and I said, well, man, that'd be a real cool gig. I'd like to do that. And Dave goes, I always forget that you play guitar because you always play bass when you play with me. He goes, I'll tell him.
Mm-hmm.
And so the next morning, it was like Saturday morning, at like 7 in the morning, Jimmy calls. And I thought it was someone messing with me because he didn't say it was Jimmy Rogers. He just said, this is, Jimmy, I want you to go on. And I completely forgot from the night before because I'd probably been drinking or whatever.
Yeah.
And I actually hung up on him. I was like, hey, man, it's too fucking early. And the phone rang again, luckily. And it was
Yeah.
Jimmy. He says, hey, no, this is Jimmy Rogers. I was told to call you. And I was like, I sat right up.
Yeah.
And, and he said they were leaving and that Monday, could I do the gig? And I said, yeah, man.
How old were you back then?
Well, I was 20. I had to be 20, at least 25, I think, because
Yeah.
I was playing with Legendary Blues Band before that. And that was the other thing. I guess he was over in Europe doing a Muddy Waters tribute tour, and Willie was there with them big guys. And I was playing with Willie then, and Willie told him the same thing. He said, well, my guitar player's sitting at home doing nothing. Why don't you call him?
Oh, I see.
And Willie, the next time I saw Willie was about a year after that. And Willie says, I should have never said nothing to Jimmy.
Cool. So playing with Jimmy, I mean, playing second guitar for Jimmy must have been interesting, and I would think challenging, because his style was, you know, under Muddy, he played all these really cool, intricate rhythm things that were really hard to duplicate. And as a front man, I mean, when I would see him, you know, it was a very rhythmic style, real subtle lead playing. So how did you fit in with that?
Well, that was my first big lesson, and I remember vividly my very first gig was playing at the Orpheum Theater at the what was then called the W.C. Handy Awards. That was my very first gig. And so we drive to Memphis, and I haven't played one song with him, haven't never stepped on the stage. Now I got to play in the Orpheum in front of all these people.
Yeah.
And it's about 5 minutes before our set to go on, and I looked at him and I said, Jimmy, what do you want to play, the top or the bottom? And he looked at me like, play what I'm not playing.
Play what I'm not playing.
And I was like, what the hell does that mean? But as soon as we got on the stage, you know, and he started playing, you know, it instantly made sense.
Yeah.
And now, you know, after many years of playing and me being a front man, I understand what it means, because when I play too at the microphone, I'm not really concerned about playing the top or the bottom. I'm kind of answering my own vocals
Right.
when I'm playing.
Right.
So that's just the thing, you know, it made me use my ears more. You know, I just did what he did. You know, when he was on the bottom, I was on the top. When he switched to the bottom, I switched to the top, you know.
Right. But he seems like a guy that would mix it up a lot too.
Yeah, so I was always on my
Yeah.
toes, just listening and watching, seeing where he's at.
Yeah. Did he pull you aside a lot and show you stuff, or ask you to play certain things? Or?
No, he was never too, you know, unless I asked him specifically. You know, I asked him a couple times, man, show me how you did this on that record, or show me how you did that. And he was, you know, his whole thing was, you know, if you got the feel and you got the timing, I don't care what you play.
Right.
As long as you got, you know, the you know, the idea of what the song's supposed to be, you know, play blues. That's what he wanted you to play.
Yeah. So was he like that with the whole band? Pretty much a pretty loose, hands-off band leader.
Yeah, man, he was real loose. You know, Jimmy was a real laid-back guy. You know, it took a lot to get him angry, and when he did get angry, man, you didn't want to make him angry again. That was one thing.
Okay. Yeah.
But you know, he was never. You know, I remember Mark Fornick and I were sitting in the van and we were talking. Yeah, I played with you for many years. And
Sure.
we were talking in the van when everyone was asleep, and we were listening to you know, a Chess Records tape, and I said, Jimmy, man, do you want us to play this, you know, like you did that? And Jimmy says, you know what? He said, that's the way Leonard Chess wanted it. We never played it that way, the same way, you know, after we recorded it.
Yeah.
Because that's one time, you know, one moment in history. You know, he said, just play blues.
Yeah.
You know, that was it.
Yeah, it's funny when you get these bands who feel like they have to copy the records, and
Right.
then you talk to the guys who made the records, and they were like, well, we never played it that way other than that one day in the studio.
Yeah.
You know, that's not how we played it live.
Yeah.
So
That's
it's real, you know. I guess the lesson is that the blues is very spontaneous music, and you know, you can't really think about it too much.
Yeah.
You know, you just gotta play and have the feeling.
All those guys, especially from that era, and especially from Muddy's band, the way they played, that was the other thing, you know, playing with Jimmy, I learned is like that, you know, using your ears and playing off each other.
Yeah.
You know, that real ensemble sound, you know.
Yeah.
Like when you listen to those records, to me, you know, it's almost like they're all soloing over each other, but they're staying out of everyone's way. Like
Yeah.
each, you know.
Right.
Span's over here playing, Walter's playing over here.
Yeah.
You know, Muddy's playing here, Jimmy's playing
Right.
here.